My name is Evan Smith. I'm CEO and editor of the Texas Tribune. I want to welcome you to this extraordinary opportunity at the Texas Book Festival to be with Buzz Aldrin. This is a true story. A couple of years ago, I was having dinner in Austin with my family at a restaurant, minding my business when two men approached the table. One of them introduced himself and told me he recognized me from the PBS talk show I host and said he liked the show. Would I mind meeting his friend Buzz Aldrin? For some reason, I didn't believe that this was Buzz Aldrin. In fact, I said, Buzz Aldrin, the astronaut? That guy can't be standing in front of me. He's an American hero. He's part of history. I'm not even sure he's real.
I'm not sure that I remember his name.
So I actually asked to see his ID. I wanted proof. In fact, I think the exact words I said were, "You're actual Buzz Aldrin?" So he showed me proof. It didn't show me his driver's license, but he showed me a business card, and I came away from that picture counter absolutely awestruck. I had met and shaken hands with a guy who walked on the moon. One of only 24 people who can claim that. I've met presidents and pro athletes and Academy Award winners, but none of them had the effect on me as the simple experience of meeting Buzz Aldrin. But maybe it makes sense because he's a very special guy. He did indeed walk on the moon, which puts him in a very exclusive club. In July of 1969, 40 years ago, while serving as the Lunar Module pilot on the first manned lunar landing mission, Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin spent nearly 2.5 hours on the surface of the moon. He'd been selected by NASA 6 years earlier to be in the third group of astronauts ever. 3 years earlier, he performed the first ever successful spacewalk. By the time he left NASA in 1971, he'd spent nearly 290 hours in space and nearly 8 hours outside one or another spacecraft. Edwin Eugene Aldrin was born 79 years ago in Montclair, New Jersey. You may be wondering how he got the nickname Buzz. His sister mispronounced brother as buzzer, which got shortened to Buzz. After graduating third in his class from West Point, he flew 66 combat missions for the Air Force in Korea. When the war ended, he was assigned to an Air Force base in Nevada, where he was an aerial gunnery instructor. Upon completion of his doctorate in astronautics from MIT, he entered Air Force Test Pilot School and then, not long after, became an astronaut. Since retiring from the Air Force in 1972, Buzz has been perhaps the world's leading advocate for manned space exploration. He's collected his fair share of awards and accolades. The Distinguished Service and Exceptional Service Medals from NASA, the General James E. Hill Lifetime Space Achievement Award from the Space Foundation, and earlier this year, the Congressional Gold Medal, which was awarded at a White House ceremony by President Obama. He has appeared on everything from the CBS drama Numbers to the British comedy Ali G in the USA. And he's even made a hip-hop video with Snoop Dogg. And of course, he was the inspiration for MTV's Video Music Awards Moon Man statuette, which was originally called the Buzz Lift. That's right. Most important for our purposes here today, he's written several truly wonderful books, a couple for kids, and the just published Magnificent Desolation, The Long Journey Home from the Moon, which chronicles quite literally his difficult re-entry from space and the astronaut's life when he returned to Earth. We're so lucky to have him here with us. Please join me in welcoming the actual Buzz Aldrin.
Okay. I elected, it was great fanfare, to just not choose to be trained as a test pilot. But after I left NASA, instead of the Commandant of the Air Force Academy, Commandant Cadets, which I felt was an easy way to ease back after 11 years away from the Air Force, they assigned me to be Commandant of the Test Pilot School. I thought that was a little ironic, and after a year, it just didn't seem to move in the direction that I had hoped my return to the Air Force would.
That's a fair fact check. That's really good. Well, let's get right to it. You have an audience here at the Paramount full of people who are dying to hear what it was like. You have done something that, again, 24 people have done. please share with us these years later. I know you have very clear memories of what that was like. Tell us what it was like.
I came into the astronaut program with a bit of additional knowledge over and above the other 13 people in the third group of astronauts. I applied for a second group because I had not had test pilot training. They couldn't accept it, but they changed the rules the next year later. So I came in as an egghead from MIT with a doctorate degree who knew specifically how to train with the McDonnell training people, the astronauts for their rendezvous missions. And that earned me the title of Dr. Rendezvous. Probably poking fun more than...
there could be worse nicknames.
No, that's right. I don't deny that. That's right. But they have a peer rating system that started with the Mercury 7. Nobody wanted to take the blame or whatever for choosing who was going to fly first. The newspapers were all guessing, is it going to be Shepard, is it going to be Glenn, is it going to be Schirra or somebody? So what they did is they called a peer rating system. You're told at the end of whatever the training period is for a third group, it was 1 year of computers, simulators, geology training, visiting different plants, and survival training in Panama, and not the Arctic really, but water survival and desert survival. And after that, you were instructed to take the list of your classmates, eliminate your name, and then rate them in the order in which you think they should fly. Now, that's not really popularity, but it kind of smacks of that a little bit when you consider that there's Air Force people and there's Navy people, and they're always kind of ribbing each other about one thing or another. Well, anyway, I don't know that I was at the bottom of the list of 14, but when the mission assignments came out, I was backing up a flight that would lead to Gemini 13, but there wasn't any 13. So I was dead end through the Gemini program, and of course, its filler purpose between the Mercury 1 man and the more complex Apollo 3 man, we couldn't just stretch out Mercury, but we very astutely then filled the gap and had continuity. We haven't had continuity since then, after the Lunar program and after the proposed program that we have now. But there are 4 missions of Gemini: long duration flight, 2 weeks, computer guided reentry, spacewalking independent of the spacecraft system, and rendezvous. It had been decided while I was at MIT that the mode of going to the moon, which was not really decided in May 61 when President Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon. Von Braun really liked the big Nova rocket, but it wouldn't have been ready until 1970 or beyond. So there were 2 Saturn V's that could have enough to join things and then go direct to the moon and come back. And the engineer, a wise guy, very astute. Not a wise guy at all. He's sort of a role model for me. John Hubbold was an engineer, and he said, I've reviewed different people's thinking, and I think that if we send 2 spacecraft there and land one of them, and the other one stays in orbit, he's got the heat shield and the heavy stuff, and then you lift off with this little flimsy thing, leave the rest of it, part of it on the surface, the rest of it in orbit, and come back. That you do it with 1 Saturn V. That's what we decided to do in 1962 while I was still at MIT. So what I was studying and writing a thesis on turned out to be very, very significant for the survival, for the return of the crews from the moon. And maybe the blind luck of that.
Right.
It was really a very wise decision, very logical, very wise. And I can't believe that I had that foresight to have selected that thing to do with my experience of intercepting airplanes and MIT's experience with space navigation computers and inertial platforms and programming.
Right. So take us inside that the Apollo. What was it like, and how did it come to be that Armstrong was out there first and you were out there second? Please again, tell us what was it like? What was going through your mind all of a sudden?
Well, the crews, especially if they're not a commander of a mission, aren't let in on all the inner working details behind the scenes. But in retrospect, it just kind of explained the way the process unfolded more than likely. All of the spacewalking that was done in the Gemini program was always done by the co-pilot. But NASA didn't like the term co-pilot, so they had a commander and a pilot. They didn't like first officer or anything like that. So the commander, to kind of survey what was going on in case anything happened, he had his pilot big study to be expert in the launch, the landing, and the rendezvous, and all that was the commander's job. So the experiments, whatever the experiments were the pilots. And so the pilot was the guy who did the spacewalk in every mission, including the Apollo mission, that was in Earth orbit to test the first test of the lander. We had the two together, but if when they came together after landing, the tunnel was jammed, you had to go out the hatch here and hand over hand get to the open hatch in this one. But it wasn't the commander side to side.
It was the pilot.
Yeah. So if success was, as President Kennedy said, to send a man to the moon, bring him back safely, he didn't say anything about walking around. But obviously, it's something to do.
So as long as you're
But the landing is absolutely the most critical thing. It's the one thing that opens up everything else. So, were we going to do this like we did the previous program? We had the surveys, one guy goes out, or are we going to use the buddy system? And if you use the buddy system, who's going to be in charge of the experiments outside? These things were not resolved at all. And so there were two different schemes. When it became clear, we're going to send two people to the moon, and they're both going to get outside. Who's going to get out first? And there were discussions about the merits of either one. We didn't know what the impact might be afterward, and clearly seniority was in everybody's mind. It wasn't Columbus's first date. Through the water of San Salvador, it was Columbus. General MacArthur got his hands wet.
It's always the big guys.
Yeah. And it just would have been absurd for Neil to sit up in the cabin and look down and watch me take the small step to man and all the crew hours for the rest of it. That just was not appropriate. We hardly explain that. So clearly the decision was made correctly. And I point out to some people in my first biography, and this one also, that when it was first announced that indeed the three of us, Neil, Mike, Collins, and myself, were on Apollo 11, and if the next two were successful, we'd be advertised right from the get-go as the first possible landing. And I went home and told my first wife, yeah, we're announced as a crew, and we're going to land on the moon. And she asked about the laundry. Did you get the laundry?
It always comes back to her, doesn't it?
And I said, you know, just between us, I would just as soon not have been on the first one because you could get all the solo speeches all over the place for the rest of your life. I just get more interesting things done maybe a rover and stuff like that. But there was no chance of altering the way things were. And it turned out absolutely the correct way, except for people who say, oh, he's bitter. He really wanted to be first.
Well, I'm just glad to know that even in space, it's all about office politics.
Oh, listen, that's not...
So you walked out on the moon. What was we'll never do this. So what did it feel like? What did you think? Were you afraid? Were you thrilled? Were you awed? Obviously, you believed it was the end of the book. Magnificent desolation. That's at least partly your reaction.
I tried to be light about it. And I knew what the checklist said. The second guy out, LMP, Lunar Module pilot, would back out, and the commander on the ground would give him directions. It's pretty close with that backpack on. You can hit the top of the hatch. So he was giving me kind of directions to back out and then get on the stairs. And I knew what the checklist said. It said LMP, partially close the hatch. I got a partially closed hatch where it said, making sure not to lock it on my way out.
Because you can imagine having to call conference or somebody in a locked place to come up. It's not
I wasn't even a handle on the outside.
terrible.
But I don't know how many see YouTube thing on email where this guy in a spacesuit and a lunar module, he gets ready to come down the ladder. And he's going down backwards, or he's going down facing outward instead of facing the ladder with his hands on it coming down. And as he's going down, he hears this clunk. And he looks back.
So you partially closed it.
Yeah. And then I got down, of course, the procedure that we both knew, and Neil did, we got down to the last rung of the ladder, was about this far from the footbed, in case you make a hard landing, it could compress, and you jump down. And then to make sure that you know how easy or difficult it is, we both agreed we jump back up again, just to see how easy or difficult it was. I couldn't see Neil doing that, but I assumed he did. I got down the last step, jump down, jump back up again, and I missed. I thought I was stronger than the 1/6 gravity, where I just felt very confident that I knew what I was doing. After all, I'd been spacewalking, But if you look closely at the pictures that you see later, you see smudge marks on it. Well, that's right. That was Neil's dust from his feet, and not after he'd been on the surface, but from the landing gear pad. So here I am, my first job, and I flunked. So I proceeded to do a checklist, check the stability and so forth. I also had an urge at that time, so I checked out the UCD, the urine collection device.
That's right, I've heard that before.
Well, I had to build up my confidence.
I guess you did.
Then I hear talk about, it reminds me of the upper western desert, beautiful. This is beautiful. That was Neil talking. And that's when I thought, it's different than that. It's magnificent. Magnificent desolation, magnificent achievement of humanity to get to the point where we have airplanes, rockets, spacecraft, go to the moon.
Think about how far we've come.
But how desolate, lifeless this place is. What we're looking at hasn't been changed hundreds of thousands of years, a little more dust on the surface. It gets very, very hot during 2 weeks of sunlight, very, very cold during 2 weeks of darkness. It's just not a good place to set up housekeeping.
Your book is, as I alluded to earlier, really a chronicle of the experience you had on the moon, but it's also an experience of your very literal reentry. and the difficulty that you've been very public in discussing in the years after that event. As you said to me earlier today, your magnificent desolation was both the reaction to what you saw, but also the reaching the apex of your career and then the downward.
Well, I didn't know that then.
No,
I didn't know what was going to come, and I was not anticipating this speech making.
But the reason of the call of the book is you see it sort of in two ways. You struggle with alcoholism, you struggle with depression, but you have, after many years, kind of come out the other side. You want to talk about the difficulty that you faced so people understand exactly what it's like to come back and be that guy?
There just was not a clear direction. I had a very structured life. A young kid in high school, football, 165-pound center, dynamic. Undefeated, untied, state champs.
We understand something about that here.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I watched that game. In the Rose Bowl. Pretty good. So it was West Point, very structured, and I got along with their radio system quite well, because I really had good teachers in high school. But I get from there into pilot training, you got to solo this airplane, and then you get into jet aircraft, and then you're shooting at targets, training at targets, and then you're off in Korea, and you're over there, and the squadron is shooting down things, and the squadron commander got shot down. They were not where they were supposed to be, or they were where they were not supposed to be, north of the Aldrin River. But there's a structure, and I appreciated all this. I began to see more and more of it. In my military service, I got to MIT. Before that, the assignment I had was supersonic F-100s in Germany. We were patrolling the border during the Hungarian crisis, and afterward, then we transitioned into nuclear weapons, where we would toss an A-bomb on a target in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland. A lot of people were doing those kind of things back in the mid-50s. Very lot. But it's very structured, very disciplined, and very goal-oriented, obviously. And MIT is no slouch. My father got his doctorate degree there. And it really humbled me a good bit to find out I wasn't that good a writer or analyst, particularly, the way the popular game. But I got my degree, and then I get into the astronaut program. Man, these are the cream of the crop. I'm not relegated to the leader position. I'm in a co-pilot position on both my flights. And then I go back to the Air Force after waiting around for a while for the kids to get out of school. And then that's not turning out too well, and I decided to retire, but I really didn't know what to do. And after a while, I decided that the experiences that I was having and hospitalized for depression while still in the Air Force, I didn't think that was going to bother my promotion. It sure does. You don't check in for depression and then expect to be a general officer. They just don't go for that kind of flawed personalities. So I became on the board of directors, National Mental Association for Mental Health, national chairman after the book came out. Movie of the week, Cliff Robertson played my part. Great guy. And the divorcee that I was courting around in New York from California was Stephanie Powers. Not bad. That wasn't working. Actually, when Cliff came down to see who this guy is and he was going to play this part, I was in my first treatment facility for alcoholism. And that's not something that, like a number of people are able to stop immediately. Well, I couldn't do that. It took a couple of years for that to really become the ruling part of my life. And you begin to accumulate years of experience, and then you don't want to lose that. And you do that by rigorous attention to helping others, showing up, doing things, mopping the floor, cleaning the coffee pots. Oh, it's wonderful thing.
It's an amazing thing, because having achieved what you achieved at one point in your career, you achieved something very important in the second.
Well, there was a time when I got myself a job selling cars in Beverly Hills. I didn't sell a single car. I see both sides, the good side and the bad side. You don't sell cars.
You don't sell cars by seeing the bad side. Well, before we open it up for questions from the audience, and we will have microphones in the aisles, and I will please implore you to get up from your seats and go to the aisle so that we can have the questions on the microphones. We'll be able to see you and answer the questions. You have become a leading advocate for manned space exploration. You believe that this country is not doing what it needs to keep competitive with the rest of the world. Just say a word or two about that, because I think it's important people to understand that this is still your belief in what you did and what you believe that you do.
Well, while the book was being written, I was working on a lot of these things, and I wish that we could have put that in an epilogue, and maybe by the time the paperback comes out, we can put some of the things that have been gathering credence in my looking at where we are, comparing it with from Sputnik to the moon, and then from the moon to the shuttle. We went about 6 years before the shuttle flew. The Russians we weren't flying at all. There was a big gap. And right now, there is a potential gap if we retire the shuttle at 2010 or 2011, the scheduled number of missions. The next spacecraft that the current plan calls for won't be ready for 5, 6, 7 years. So how are we going to get our people to our space station, our $100 billion investment? We got to hitch a ride with the Russians. We got to ride like a tourist or somebody else. Pay them to take us to the space station. Why? Well, because we didn't do what we agreed to. We agreed to put a lifeboat out there. U.S. contribution, and that could have been a transfer vehicle also. Now the spacecraft that are being developed for this vision that was put forth at the beginning of the election year by the previous president in January of 2004. It calls for building a system to get back to the moon by 2020. Well, the implementation of that, instead of one rocket to do that, was 2 rockets, a small one and a big one. And the small one turns out to be one solid rocket, but that wasn't good enough, so they had to make it bigger, and it changed quite a bit, and it's still too small. So the ramifications of that spill over into a much bigger rocket. The lander has to be much bigger, and it's all much more expensive, and it hasn't been funded properly by either administration.
Of course, the question is, can we afford it? The question is, can we afford not to do it?
Really, after what we've done, do we want to have to hitch a ride with the Russians for that long? And do we want to land in the ocean again for the next 20 years? After 30 years, we've flown the shuttle and landed very nicely on the runway. It's a great opportunity for us to exercise this global space leadership that we so aptly earned back in the 60s and 70s, and it's being eroded away by lack of support, lack of enthusiasm for the space shuttle, not living up to its expectations, the space station taking a lot longer, and just about when it's ready, we're thinking of abandoning it because we're running out of funds. The peak of the funding for Apollo, which was 2 years at least before the landing, and then started to come down from 1960. It was 3.5% to 4% of our budget. Right now it's at 0.6%, and not keeping up with inflation. How can you run a world quality space program with that kind of a lack of enthusiasm? It's not inspiring. It hasn't been. We've been seeing in low Earth orbit instead of having people explore, like the agency, government agency needs to do the things that reach out. Once we learn how to explore, then we develop, and we do that with commercials. We should be doing commercial flights to low Earth orbit. Let the private sector come up with a spacecraft that can land on a runway, use one of the 2 Air Force rockets that also launch commercial satellites, but they're run in a commercial way by those companies. And then why should we go back to the moon with all of our experience and get there 50 years after we've been there before?
You think we should go to Mars?
Well, of course, that's a logical place to go. But it's not going to be done in a decade. It's going to be done, in my estimation, in 2.5 decades, 2035. Why? Because for the Wright brothers, 03 to landing on the moon, 66 years. And 66 years to 1969, you get 2035. Certainly, from landing on the moon and doing what we did, we ought to be able to settle the planet and the solar system and do it in a progressive way that has a recessionary recovery budget for 10 years and then is reaffirmed on the 50th anniversary or about then of our landing on the moon by the president elected in 2016. Then he can say, well, we're going to start financing the actual Mars landers and implementing, going a whole lot further. And if this president chooses not to do that, I can guarantee you I will be working very hard for the president elected in 2016 for him to take the historical credit thousands of years from now.
Over to you or involve you. Let's ask them to bring the lights up. We have microphones again. We should have microphones in the 2 aisles. Oh, I don't see them. We have microphones. We have handhelds. So we do have one more night to get this right.
Leaving, you're getting them on.
Right. We'll take as many questions as we can. Mr. Aldrin has a hard out at 1:30. We'll stay for as long as we can. We start on the left, the right, back to the left, and so on. Sir.
This team of people that work well together, but work necessarily the same personalities. I just wondered what it was like for you to see, or for the 3 of you to be together this anniversary year.
Right.
And I don't know what the sense of relationship is between the 3 of you.
You guys are joined by history.
Yeah, well, it's not a close, cohesive bunch. None of the 24, all of there are 18 of us still living, but the people who reached them were 12. Walked on the moon, 9 of those are still living. It's not a cohesive, it's really a core group like my fighter squadron in Germany that gets together once a year. We just love to see each other, and we're not sort of envious of somebody who got a little more credit than somebody else. I made efforts to bring people together on these 40th anniversaries, and it just didn't work out the way I hoped it would. Some people are satisfied with putting Apollos or the past of doing the minimum appearances when NASA strongly endorses it, or whatever the criteria is. And it runs the spectrum. There are maybe a little less than half show up regularly at conferences about the future. It's very small number. Me and another guy or two is about it. And that is the way I hope it would be. It'd be nice to tap into that experience, that credibility, and then establish a common sense and feeling about what this group thinks about what we're doing, and then lay that out. I think people will appreciate it.
Sir, over here.
Yes, first of all, congratulations on the heroism and rules on everybody. 3 things happened or happened recently. this week, NASA just launched the first of the new phase of rockets that they're talking about, and a successful launch that had a payload. Second thing is the Bezos initiative to build a commercial spacecraft, which is happening in Texas, of course. And the third thing is the long talked about ladder to orbit. Could you comment on those three initiatives to develop new ways to get to space, and what your analysis is of those? Does that represent the kind of initiative you're looking for?
Well, the rocket that was tested was not the rocket Ares 1 that would be used. That's 5 segments. This one was the 4-segment rocket that's been used for 120 missions.
So this didn't represent anything new.
Well, yeah, it was by itself, and it had to have roll control, it had to have some other control, and it had a payload on the top with an upper stage of sorts. And if you really look at it with the other segment, it got the nickname of the stick. And I started calling it the slender stick. Because it's pretty slender and it gets winds aloft, there are going to be bending moments that it was just not designed to have. And it's got vibrations when you get near the end of the burn. You expect that. So it's not exactly heritage. And it's small, and it's turning out to be too small. So we can't put enough fuel in the spacecraft. So the lander has to have the fuel to put the two into orbit. And that makes it much, much bigger. And the big rocket is even bigger, not 5 segments, but 5.5 segments. And not 5 engines as we could plan, but 6 engines. So it's kind of snowballing. And it should have been one rocket. One rocket that used the 4 segment solids, the tank, and that's what my company, Starbucks, was proposed in November of 2003. And we put a spacecraft inside, on the side of it, instead of the orbiter. And that spacecraft is one of the leading candidates right now. If we had it to do over again, we'd put just cargo on the side and the spacecraft on the top. But that now should launch the Orion spacecraft, not the winged runway lander. That's commercial, and that should go on an Atlas rocket. And the things that we've been doing, including a continuous orbit between Earth and Mars since 1985, those are really sound things that were way ahead of their time when we kind of eased them into the system, and they were not adopted. But now they fit in very nicely with a progressive plan that gets us to the surface of Mars on the 101.
So NASA
Well, they're not making wise choices, and they're trying to stick to the course. Stay the course, got hell or high water. If it looks bad now, it's liable to look even worse later.
Sir, I'm Mark Weston. I'm an author here at the festival. I'll be speaking about Saudi Arabia tomorrow. I'd love to have 2% of this crowd. 22 years ago, in a house in Arlington, Virginia, I lived with your son, Andy. Passed away.
I take his advice all the time. He gives me the corporate perspective. And he says, Dad, you got some great ideas, but we do too at Boeing. And they go on up the line, they get approved, they get the account guy. There's only one thing he's interested in: shareholder value. If this country in the next 20, 30 years is run by shareholder value, we're going to go down the tube. That's not the way it is. He's doing extremely well. He's vice president of strategic business for the joint venture United Launch Alliance, Boeing and Lockheed together. Thank you.
Does he have a family?
He's married. He's given me a birthday present of diving in the Galapagos in June.
You look like
should think ahead, think of the future, not just what's in it for me right now. Can I get into hedge funds? Can I get into diversify? Can I make money out of money? I think what President Kennedy said, he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I think there's a disdain among people growing up now for the suckers who choose the military life. I don't have to do that. I can go to Harvard and get a law degree and get into Wall Street. That's got us in a little trouble. But you know who gets us out of trouble? The military. Well, I look at the me that I am now and the me that I was, and I'd be as grateful as I can to know how that happened. I try not to blatantly wave that around with the anonymity that we have. And I take a little flack for maybe I've written the book. But I feel I'm a role model, sort of, rather than a hands-on sponsor. There's principles before personalities. And I think it's just a turning things over, finding a new way of looking at it. I serve myself communion on the lunar surface. But that's not the same spiritual person I am now. It's moved on to considerably more encompassing. Historically, watching and seeing what humankind has done and what it has done for humankind, and in the name of higher powers. We're little kids on this planet. We learned a little, maybe a good deal about the small world, the micro world. We learned a little bit more about the macro world, but we don't know a hell of a lot about how humans relate to each other, at least we haven't progressed there. That's spirituality. Got a long ways to go, I think.
I'm afraid I don't recall this in advance. The people lined up. We're about to hit 1:30. I'm only going to be able to get 2 more questions from Mr. Aldrin. We're there. We're going to have to call out.
Okay. The Chinese and India are both showing a lot of interest in getting into space and taking the first steps. And I'm wondering if they really get started, I think that the world may just turn upside down for the United States and Russia.
Yeah, I want to help them all we can because we have more experience, we have a leadership role, we can control the commercial activities that are brought about by exploration, then development, science, and we have the experience. We don't care if you test me again to do that. We can control robots at that short distance away, but not so surface of Mars. The rovers that have been there 5 years, 5.5 years, 2 of them, according to the program manager, project manager of the whole program, if we had intelligence in orbit for direct control, this in orbit around Mars, they could have done what they did in at least 3 weeks. That's the power of not down in the atmosphere where you got to come back up again and all that fuel. Clearly, the most strategic spot for us in the future is the moon of Mars called Phobos. I hope before long everybody in the country will know the word Phobos.
Last question. This young woman right here.
Hi, last night I went to go see Sally Ride. I just wanted to know, what was your favorite part of being in space?
Well, it's always nice to come back home. But I think anyone who has experienced the freedom, the exhilaration of zero gravity and floating around, maybe not 6 months, a year, kind of get lonesome after a while, but being a pioneer, being a person that does something new and different than people have done before, being a pilgrim on the Mayflower. Those people didn't hang around Plymouth Rock looking for a return trip. They were settlers, they were pioneers, they were discovering new opportunities for human existence. It's great to be a part of something that is historical. What I used to remember when I was a kid, maybe about your age, my father and his other aviation pioneers would sit around and talk about the good old days. And I thought, that was sad. Why aren't they talking about what's coming in the future? And I'm very future-oriented. I wrote a science fiction story about travel to and from Alpha Centauri. How and why would you do that? You don't go warp 7, you don't beam people up and down the way Star Trek. We need reality in our understanding. Otherwise, we're going to be led down expectations. Somebody asked about the ladder to space, the elevator. You got to get practical about things. You got an elevator going up from the equator. Thanks very much. An elevator going up from the equator up to 22,000 miles up. That's a cable going up. Now, it's going around with the Earth. But the satellites that are lower altitude, each one goes north through the equator, it comes south through the equator. It's only a question of time before the thousands of ones up there are going to hit that damn cable. And you can't touch it. When I heard that analysis, I thought, why didn't I think of that?
Well, we're very fortunate to have had a chance to spend time with the true American